On this episode, the season finale of Drinks Around the Table, I sit down with comics, prose, movie, and TV show writer extraordinaire Cullen Bunn. We get into his love for the horror genre, how he navigates the business of telling stories, and how the first person he writes for is himself. Hope you enjoy. I'm sure people are wondering, wait a minute, this isn't an indie artist. This is Cullen Bunn. But, like, you've got plenty of indie stuff, right?
I'm pretty indie. I still consider myself an indie creator.
Right.
I think I have a little, I just looked over, I have a little magnet right over here on the wall that says, I love indie horror. I'm an indie guy, man. I came up as an indie person, and I'm always going to consider myself an independent.
So you fit right in here, is my point.
Well, sure.
All right, so you're my season finale. Thank you for that, by the way. I'm going to hit you with the question that I hit everybody else with, though. What art form was your first love?
Well, it would have been comics. I think comic books, when I think back, I have very, very early memories of reading comics. So it was comics, and then, around the same time, the greatest art form of all time, Saturday morning cartoons,
Especially our age.
Yeah, right? So yeah, but comics for sure was the thing I was really into. I grew up in that golden era of going to garage sales and being able to buy like a stack of 50 comic books for $2 or a couple of bucks, and I was always just surrounded by comic books. It was cheap and easy entertainment for me.
I dig it. What was your go-to comic?
When I was really young, it didn't matter to me. It was as long as it was a comic. I didn't care. Later on, I became really fascinated by the Micronauts. That was the first comic book where I really started thinking about, somebody's building a world here. Someone's doing something with this, with the Micronauts, and it's really cool. And I became super obsessed with it. And I was, again, very young. And, but really, I liked everything. I was probably more of a Marvel guy as a kid. Yeah. I loved the DC horror books. I loved House of Mystery and House of Secrets and stuff like that. But for the superhero side of things, I was probably much more. I'm very scattered. I was much more a Marvel guy, but my favorite superhero was Green Arrow. So I was like, wow. I was just really all over the place. Yeah.
Wow, Micronauts and Green Arrow. That's some interesting pulls.
I liked any of that stuff, man. It didn't. I was happy reading any of it back in those days.
Right. Anything you can get your hands on.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
I'd read them like I'd get issue 152. That's like the middle part of a storyline, and have no idea what happened to these characters, after that issue, and it would be months to years before I ever found the next part of that story or whatever. So. Right.
Well, and I've had this conversation too of like how when we were younger, that was the thing. You'd find whatever. For me, it was the local grocery store, and whatever issue you got, yeah. you just kind of figured out who was who and what was going on, and even if it was the middle of the story, where nowadays it seems like that's not the intent. Like they can't roll with that anymore.
Well, I feel like the readership has changed, and the publishing models have changed. But yeah,
that's fair.
There's no patience for that kind of story anymore.
Right.
And there's definitely no patience for not knowing what happened next.
Yeah. Give it to me now. Let me binge it.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
All right. So while you've played in many different genres and formats, if genre was a town, is it fair to say that you live in the horror subdivision?
I like that, the horror subdivision. Yeah. No, that's and I'll always kind of dabble in other areas, but I'm a horror guy. I'm gonna always come back. I'm always going to come back to that. In fact, I just sent some pitches off to a publisher a couple of weeks ago, and they wrote back and said, "Man, we'd love to see something that's not horror from you." It's like, well, good luck with that. I don't know what to tell you. You know, I mean, I can pitch you something that's horror adjacent.
Right.
It's not going to be, you know, it's just where I feel most comfortable. It's what I like to. It's the kind of stories I like to tell. It's the kind of stories I like to read. So that's, you know, I'm gonna stick there for a little while, probably.
Yeah.
I guess I've chosen my my cemetery plot, as it were. And it's
Nice.
in the horror genre.
Nice. All right. Okay, so that leads me into my next. So I'm a horror cinephile, as are you. We've both read more horror novels and comics than we've had hot meals. So what is it, do you think, about growing up, in your case North Carolina, in my case Missouri, that set the horror hook so deeply?
You know, I don't know. I was always fascinated by monsters and the creepy side of things. I got a thrill from it, and from a very young age. I was just, you know, my older brothers would tell me, "Oh, there's a boy drowned in that lake out that you could see from the back of my house. Drowned in that lake, and his ghost walks around it at night." And I remember being terrified, but I wanted to be out there to see it, just to see that ghost.
Right.
And so I was wanted to, you know, I just liked the feeling of being scared. As I got older, you know, okay, it's a, you know, it's sort of cathartic to experience, you know, to write about these terrible things, and then maybe they won't happen, or whatever else. As a kid, though, the truth of the matter is, it was fun to be scared, and I just liked it. And I was a scared kid, but I was still excited to, you know, I was excited for that ghost living on the lake out there.
Right. See, I'm the flip side. I was the older brother my sister, to this day, we have an antique, like, family photo of some, you know, old days black and white photo that she still will not look at because of a story I told her, made up a story that just freaked her out so badly.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I remember these stories my older brother, my dad, my uncles would tell me, and how entertained and excited I was by those stories. And you remember how fun it was to scare the bejesus out of your sister with those stories. So that's really that's the path. That set us down the path. It's fun to be scared, and I wanted to do that with other people.
Right.
And you just enjoyed torturing your sibling.
Exactly.
Wanted to do that with other people.
Exactly.
So
well, and it was, the storytellers in my family run rampant. So it was well, if I'm gonna be freaked out, I'm gonna freak you out. And so you just make up something, freak them out. And maybe that's what it is. In coming to towns, you know, bigger cities over the years, and learning that wandering in the woods in the middle of the night is not something that, you know, or going to graveyards or whatever, is not something city people, they're just like, what do you do? No, city mice don't do that.
No. That's a country mouse thing.
It's too much. Can't deal with it. All right, so that's fair. I dig that. That's just part of the roots of coming where we came from. Just horror.
And it's funny because, you know, you think of the city and people are like, oh, that city is so dangerous. It's so dangerous to live in the city. It's so dangerous. And I've been to plenty of cities that people said were dangerous. I'm like, this is just a city. You guys need to relax just a little bit.
Right.
But I've also been to cities where I'm like, okay, this is a dangerous area. I'm like, okay, this is a dangerous place. And yet, it ain't as dangerous as you can wander into places out in the country that are about 3,000 times more dangerous than that. I mean, I've done it many times. I've gotten into big trouble out in the woods. I've gone to places where I'm like, oh, not supposed to be here. This is not, you do not want to be here.
Right.
I got some winter bone nonsense going on. I gotta get the hell out.
Yeah.
So,
100%. Oh man. All right. So another passion we share is role-playing games. Where'd that romance start for you, and what kind of effect is playing over the years had on your work, do you think?
so I am a role-playing gamer from way, way, way back. I can walk to my shelf now. When I was a kid, I went to the toy store and I found this little box called the Wizard's Bane.
Wow.
And it has paints, and it had like miniatures to paint, and a paintbrush and a die, and an adventure game starter. And it was like, I don't know, it was probably $3 or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I must have begged my parents, please let me have this thing. It looks like magic in a box. And yeah, and it was. I loved it right away. I was a huge fan of that kind of game. I just recently, within the last couple of years, reacquired all those little box sets that came out back in the day. So that was, I think, the first thing I found. And then I remember being in second grade, and my friend Vardell brought his older brother's copy of Tomb of Horrors into school. And Tomb of Horrors has this book that's full of pictures. It's pictures from the adventure that you're supposed to show your players. And I remember sitting at lunch, and he was showing me these pictures. And weirdly, he was singing a song about each of the pictures. I can remember the song in my head. I remember him singing about, the skull with gems in its eyes. And I was just into it. I went to his house maybe a few weeks later, and his older brother had, 20 people playing Dungeons and Dragons in the house. And they were doing crazy stuff. They're like, all right, you're in a maze, and here's the maze. And they had like giant poster boards with these intricate mazes, and like, go solve this and you can return to the adventure. And they were sending people off. There were kids running all over the house. And I just thought, this is the coolest. I just wanted to be part of that. And I started playing D&D from that point forward. I was a D&D fanatic. And yeah, what I will tell you is, I think for a writing point of view, when you're playing D&D, you don't have the opportunity to, if you're running a game, if you're the dungeon master, you don't have the opportunity to have writer's block, because your players say, I'm going to do this, and you have to say, all right, I'm going to think on my feet and figure out what happens next, and go. And I think that skill translates into writing in a big way. You write yourself into a corner. You have to think fast to get out of that corner. And yeah, I write myself into corners all the time, and then I have to think of some way to get out of it.
Right. Okay, I can see that.
And I think playing role-playing games, was a big part of that. It helped develop that skill set, and it just continued to foster this love of telling stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was your first gaming experience? What was your intro into?
Oddly enough, it was similar in that I went to my buddy's house, and his older brothers. There weren't. Huh?
Did he sing you a song?
No.
Did your friend sing you a song?
That part was not similar. The house full of kids playing it, and not 20. That's insane. But it was basically
crazy.
Like 5 or 6 older, 5-6 years older than us, sitting around the table playing, and they wouldn't let us play at first. They let us watch. And I was digging it that much, but it was, I don't even know that it was like a module that they were playing. They may have just been riffing homebrew, but because I don't remember enough of the details to know if it was, it certainly wasn't Tomb of Horrors, because they'd all be dead. That's an insanely difficult.
Yeah.
But so for me, and I was hooked too. Like it was done, and then I just started. I got my hands on a pack of dice, and I just started making up my own stuff. I didn't have any modules. I had a lot of game books. I graduated from Choose Your Own Adventures to like Lone Wolf on up that way.
Oh yeah, all that nonsense. It was so good.
Yeah, but I'd say for me, role playing games, I like working myself out of the corner. I could see that. For me, it was pacing, learning where people like they're bored now. We got to trim this. We got to speed this up. But either way, like it definitely.
Do you, I think you're a little younger than me, but when I got into gaming, it was like the height of satanic panic, right? It was. You're what, 51? Same time, maybe. Yeah. So
yeah.
There we go.
I'm 47. Oh, sorry. We could cut that part out.
It's funny though, because that was height of satanic panic, and I remember like the evening TV shows, PM Magazine, which was like this, not a variety, but they do like little news things, and they did a piece on Dungeons and Dragons, and they're like, and then they summon demons, and they were showing miniatures and this eerie light, and it was supposed to just terrify you. And I'm just sitting there going, that looks awesome. I'm in. And then Mazes and Monsters came out.
Yeah, Tom Hanks. Damn it.
And you're like, that looks like a lot of fun. I want to go in that dungeon, in that sewer, and encounter monsters.
Yep.
But Vardell's dad was a preacher, so anytime my parents would get on there, I'm like, Vardell's dad doesn't have a problem with this, and he knows God personally. So
I'm good. Let's go. Yeah, that's hilarious. Wow. Yeah. No, I definitely had pockets of that where you'd have people that were, no, get that out. Can't have that in the house. And then others that were just like, well, like my friends' older brothers that were, their parents didn't care. But I lucked out there.
He had friends who had to sneak. Their parents could never know playing D&D. So then we try like Twilight 2000, because that's not got any supernatural elements. It's war, and they're like, my mom hates martial arts, so if any martial arts is in this, that's also devil worship. I'm like, man, your mom is bonkers.
Right? How do you get to leave the house?
Right.
That's wild. All right. Well, so regarding your process, like how you write, methodology-wise, like whether it's you go to a bar or a diner or you stay at home and wear one sock, whatever, like do you write the same way whether it's prose or a script? Or do you approach it differently?
I think it's vastly different, for me anyway. For me, comic books, there's a lot more outlining. I outline. I used to be is it a pantser is what they call it?
Yeah.
If you're flying by the seat of your pants. Okay. I used to be that way with prose.
Mm.
And that's why I have boxes and boxes and boxes of stories that never went anywhere, because I would just get hung up on, I'd lose track of it. I'd be like, I don't even know what's happening here anymore. So I might as well give up. So I outline everything now, but my comic book outlines are so much more intense, because versus every other medium, comic books are about economy. Nothing else works the way comics does in terms of the economy, because you have to be very aware of how many issues are in a series, how many pages are in an issue, how many panels are on a page. And I have to know that when I go into a comic. Almost, I'd say 90% of my work on scripting is done in the outline stage when it comes to comics, because I have to know where everything goes, where the page turns are, where those panels are. So I do a ton of outlining for a comic. Versus for prose, I still do outlining, but it's not as rigid, because I have a lot more flexibility in prose.
Sure.
If I want a chapter to be, 3-4 times as long as the next chapter, well, I can do that. But I can't do that in a comic. You don't have that flexibility. So comics are very outline heavy for me.
All right, that makes sense. What about scripts like TV show, movie script, like those versus? Is it similar to the comic scripts?
Well, no, even those do not have anywhere near the outline that a comic has.
Right.
And this is, look, I'm gonna tell you right now, I think a comic is tough to write. I think comics are tough because, and I don't think everybody's cut out for it. Comics are tough because of that economy of language. And if you're not careful, you don't get it. And, you know, scripts, yes, you have to. I mean, I just finished a feature script not long ago, and I'm just like, I need more. I need to add some stuff to this. It's not long enough. And I'm like, I've never had that problem with a comic. I've never been like, I don't have enough stuff in here.
Right.
It's always, I gotta cut something else out. I gotta get rid of something. But you know, features, I outline, but the outlines are like almost like prose documents.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry as much as I do with a comic, because comics, I know I'm limited there. There's not a question. You know, I can't call my editor. I mean, I have done this, but most of the time you can't call your editor and say, I need to add 4 pages to this comic. They're going to laugh at you and say that's not happening. So.
Sure. Wow. Now, see, I've only written, I mean, my own, which did you ever draw any of, like, do you draw? Yeah, do you draw at all?
You know, when I was a kid, I was very talented. As a, you know, middle school, early high school, I was a very talented artist. And if I had kept up with it, I think I'd be pretty good, but I didn't keep up with it. I lost interest in it. And so my artistic ability never advanced beyond where it was in early high school. And I regret that sometimes. Like, man, I wish I'd have kept up with it. I could draw my own comics.
Yeah.
But no, I didn't. I don't consider myself an artist anymore. I think my art, compared to the art of you know, comic artists these days, is not. It doesn't compare.
Right.
It's.
See, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I want to hear.
Well, I come at it now. So my thing was during the pandemic, I just wanted to learn to draw, and so because I'd always wanted to, I'd never, you know, dabbled even really other than to kind of draw out stick figure fights for whatever prose thing I was writing. So I got enough people, like my buddy Daniel Moeller, my wife, were like, look, you're digging this. Why don't you just, I finally heard enough of like, stop comparing myself to people who are masters at this. So I did my own comic, which the point of all that was, of saying that was to, I can edit on the fly as the guy that's writing it and drawing it. So I learned quickly that, like what you're talking about, the economy of, oh crap, like that's a lot to put on this one page, or that's way too verbose. I don't want to letter all that shit. All right, never mind. I'm cutting this down. So yeah, I don't have a lot of experience writing a script for other artists. But what little I have had notes be like, look, that's too much. You know, you're trying to tell too much with one panel. Like, we got to spread this out a little bit. So I'm learning, but it sounds like you just put all that art or the drawing talent and just switch gears over to writing, and here we are.
I did, and I think maybe I'm not patient. I wasn't patient enough to hone my artistic abilities. You know, I just couldn't get into it. It irritated me that I wasn't improving, you know, as fast as I had. Because the one thing, I mean, even when I was a kid, I wanted to tell a lot of stories. I didn't just want to tell a story. I want to tell a lot of stories, and I'm still that way. I mean, I want to tell a lot of stories, and the way I can do that is through writing. I can get a lot of stuff out there. And maybe I need to, you know, maybe I need to slow down. I don't know. I got one speed, and that's the speed I work at. So,
man, it seems to be working for you.
eventually I'll just, I feel like I've slowed down a lot. People say, oh man, you sure are productive. I'm like, man, I feel that I'm half as productive as I was 5 years ago. But okay, you think I'm still? That's fine.
And that's, I mean, Warren Ellis touched on it in his newsletter about the fact, he said something about you have to sit down and do the thing before the idea turns to ashes inside of you. And that's as far as being hyper productive. So I mean, I get it.
But I will say this, I've never had an idea that a good idea never turns to ashes for me. I mean, I have a box that I started collecting index cards. I put an index card every day, at least one idea. Bad idea, good idea, I put an index card in this box. And then I try to forget about it. And then if I'm ever like, I need to come up with something, I grab that index, I grab that box and I can riffle through it. I do it with my old notebooks all the time. I mean, to me, if the idea is worthwhile, it never turns to ashes for me. I've written comics. I've written comics based on notes scribbled 25 years earlier. That I'm like, oh, I like that idea. I should do something with it. And so I hoard that stuff. I love it.
Wow. So you not even, I mean, so I have to whittle on the idea a little bit before it'll be a keeper, like what you're talking about. I can't have just like I used to be able to like even remember on a drive, be like, wonder what that thread is, and then let it sit and then pull on it later. But I can't anymore. If I don't at least twiddle with it a little bit, it's gone.
No, I mean, the idea might vanish if I don't write it down, but even a little idea, even a sentence or two can, one day I might pull something out of that box and use it.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, well, it's outside of co-created comic projects, where I presume you knew who would be penciling, inking, coloring going in.
Not always, but...
Really? Like the co-created stuff? You didn't always know who was going to draw it?
Oh, co-created.
Yeah.
You say? Yeah.
Yeah, outside of that.
Most of the time, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's what I meant. Yeah, outside of those, because I was like, man, if it's co-created with an artist, that's kind of messed up if they were like, well, you might draw it, but you might not draw it. But like,
I mean, but even then, sometimes I have come up with pitches for comics and sent it to the publisher for creator-owned comics, and we have to. So I'm pitching it and even writing the script before I have an artist in mind for it. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes.
I guess that's where I was going with that. If you don't know ahead of time who's going to be drawing it, how does that change the dialogue between you and the eventual, like how you guys collaborate, the eventual artists?
It doesn't change it too much for me. My scripts look the same for an artist I've worked with for 25 years versus an artist I'm working with for the first time. I don't write any differently. I don't shortcut. I don't think my longtime collaborators wouldn't tolerate a shortcut script. I don't think they would hate it. So I write a full script across the board. The biggest, there are some differences, obviously. I mean, if I'm doing a book that I know Brian Hurt's going to be drawing, there are certain things like, as I'm writing it, I can't help but think, Brian's going to draw this. It's going to be awesome.
Right. Okay, cool.
But I write every script with when the artist draws this, it's going to be awesome. And we try to find the right artist for the project, and then that conversation can begin. And sometimes, that's the ideal is that there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of discussion. It's not always the case. Sometimes the artist just doesn't want to talk about it. They just want to draw it. They just want to draw what I've written and move forward.
Does that affect at all how you, like, do you think it's, how do I phrase this? Does that affect how you look at the project when it's over? Like, do you think it's better if they just take it and go, or do you like that back and forth?
I like a little back and forth. I feel like every project where the every member of the creative team is vested and really wants to do something cool is going to be a better project in the long run. It's going to be something that everybody that you can see it on the page. If a member of the team isn't into it, you at least as far as I'm concerned, I can tell every time I read a comic and like, no, somebody in this project was not into this. They were bored. They didn't like it. They got in an argument. You know, somebody stole somebody's girlfriend or spouse. I don't know what it was, but something in this comic ruined that relationship, and I can tell it every time.
Really?
And yeah, and I can see it in my own books if you know, if the artist isn't into it, or I'm not into it for some reason.
Right.
Maybe, I don't know. I can see it when it comes out. It comes across loud and clear. And maybe the vast majority of readers won't notice this, but I think it's obvious.
Yeah. Can you, with your stuff, not that you've gotten bored or whatever mid projects, but a few different creators and I have talked this season about, as far as the Guillermo del Toro talked recently about his work. His body of work is his biography. Like, it's his autobiography.
Right.
He knows where he was in each shot, like what was going on with his life. Do you have anything in your work where you look back and you're like, man, life was dope right there, or man, life sucked right here? Or does it work as a biography?
I don't know that I've ever looked back and thought life was dope ever at any time. That's not how I think of things. I think life wasn't quite as bad as it usually is this week. I mean, I look at my stuff and I can tell, I know what was, I mean, you know, I've always had this mutant power that I can tell you every movie theater I've ever seen a movie in. Like, if you say, you know, where were you with Event Horizon and who did you watch it with? I can tell you everyone I was with on, you know, whatever movie it was. And I've been able to do that all my life. And the same with comics. You know, I remember moments in time that were taking place around these comics. Right. And, you know, I remember the interactions with the artists and the writers. For most of them, in recent years, at a couple of conventions, people have brought me books, and I'm just like, I don't remember this book.
Wow.
And it's not, it's never with a creator-owned book. But I remember people bringing me books on it. It's like Gandalf in the Mines of Moria. I'm like, I have no memory of this.
Right.
I don't remember this book at all. And I always feel kind of, it happened last year in Tennessee. This guy brought up this stack. It was a series called DC World's End. And I was brought in midway through the series to do some work on it. And the book had like 6 other writers. And this guy was so excited about the series. And he's like, I gotta ask you about this, and I gotta ask you about this.
Oh, no.
And I felt really terrible. I was like, man, I don't want to lead you astray here, but I don't remember one thing about this book. I don't remember this.
Right.
I don't remember working on it. I don't remember these covers. I don't remember the books coming out. It is a non-entity to me. I don't remember it. And
yeah,
there's a couple of books like that people have brought me, and I was like, okay, I know I did it. I get it. I did it.
Got my name on it. Yeah.
Yeah. But wow. It's never creator-owned stuff. Creator-owned stuff I remember, you know, across the board. I remember all that stuff. But that one, that's the one that I have trouble remembering working on, is that World's End from DC. I couldn't tell you one character in that comic. I mean, and I think Green Arrow's in that comic. And I couldn't tell you that Green Arrow's in it for sure. I think he is, maybe.
Wow. So what? I mean,
my one shot at writing Green Arrow, and I don't.
And you don't remember doing it. Like, I mean, is it just your sheer amount of work that you've done, or is it it's time to lay off the bourbon? Like, what is it that makes you just
It was
forget?
not, it was just such a weird project because there were so many writers on it. And I don't know, look, I know that comic book companies, like big comic book companies, they just get giddy at the concept of a writer's room.
Yeah.
They love it. Oh, let's do a writer's room like Hollywood TV shows. And guess what a writer's room does for a comic? Makes a shitty comic is what it does.
Yeah.
And look, I like writers' rooms for TV. I think they're fun. It's a different vibe. It doesn't work with comics. And just like I can tell you when a person's not engaged in one of these books they're writing, I can tell you when a book was written in a writer's room because it's terrible.
Right.
It's just bad. And there's too much of that nonsense. It's too much. Just get a writer to write a comic. It doesn't take 6 writers to write a comic. It doesn't take a room full of 20 people to tear each other's ideas apart to do a comic book.
Right.
But that's just me. That's me on my soap. Can you see I stepped onto my soapbox for a second?
Stepped right up. All right, so we'll shift away from.
No, I'm not. And look, and I'm not in a bad mood about that. This is just me. And there are very successful, very talented writers who would probably tell me right now, "You're out of your mind." It does make the comic better, and that's fine. I don't care. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
My opinion matters not one bit in the grand scheme of things. Just like everybody else's opinion, it matters one bit.
Yeah.
Don't be so damn precious. It's a. In some places, they take comics, they read them, and they throw them in the trash. It's a disposable medium. Get over yourself.
Well, and I'd even argue
easy,
that. I'd argue
easy,
that.
Francis.
I'd argue that you can tell it in movies too. Like it's not specific to comics. Like when you watch a movie that's just kind of all over the place, and you look and there's 6 credited writers. It's like, oh,
I think it's across the board. I think you can always tell it. I think you can see it, and I think you can see when people aren't engaged in the novel they were writing, movie they were producing, or the TV show they were in. I think you see that.
Yeah.
But I've been living and breathing comics for so long that that's where I immediately gravitate to.
Right. That's where you've landed. That's fair.
Yeah.
So I've read both the graphic novel adaptation of A Passage in Black, and I watched the movie adaptation of The Empty Man. Speaking of which, do you watch Critical Role at all? You Critical Role viewer?
I'm not like a Critical Role like die hard. Like I can't watch. I haven't watched watched all of it and everything, but what I have watched, I've enjoyed.
They their little show that kind of breaks down the show, their 4-sided dive. Not Cullen Bunn, but Empty Man got a shout out. They were talking about how did they get to the topic? It was like a cult horror done well or something, but the movie was brought up. I was like, oh, like I actually, because I just listened to it. I wasn't watching, but I was like, wait, what? I understood that reference. Anyway.
They're like, thank God it wasn't like the comic.
Well, it'd been cooler if they'd mentioned the comic, but I was like, they mentioned the flick. Anyway, I've seen both of those adaptations. So talk to me a little about what it's like to see your creation born through other creators' eyes.
Yeah, it's for me, it has and always will be very exciting. Even when I don't think it's pulled off as well as it could be, it's still pretty freaking cool that somebody wanted to do something based on my work. You know, and it's there were people doing fan films based on The Damned years ago, and I got so giddy over it.
Sure.
I was like, oh, film with The Damned, and it's cool. It's kind of cool. And and I've been involved with TV productions of my work, and the theatrical productions, and then comic book adaptations of prose stories. It's always really cool. It's the like Passage in Black, which was I wrote a bunch of prose stories, and then I had writers adapt them into comics. And I don't think people realized how hands off I was with that. I was like, I think people were very nervous. Oh, I've got to keep it. It's got to be exactly what Cullen told the story. I'm like, no, it didn't have to be. You could have done go. And for me, and I have a lot of conversations with producers and directors these days, and I say it every time. I want to be able to recognize it. That's it. I just want to recognize it. I don't care if it's changed. I don't care because what works in a comic may not work in other formats.
Sure.
It's just the way it is. Things don't always translate well. You need different elements, and that's fine. I just want to be able to recognize it going forward and be involved. I want to have a voice in the room, and I think that scares some people because this guy he's gonna be raining all over our parade.
Right.
You can't do that because it's true to the canon of whatever you wrote.
Be real precious about it.
I'm not a precious person. I just I want it to be. If there's no point in adapting something if you're not gonna at least be able to recognize it as an adaptation.
Sure.
Otherwise, just do your own thing. Just do your own thing.
Right.
I remember I'm a big Godzilla fan, and I remember years ago when the reviled Matthew Broderick Godzilla movie came out.
Yeah.
TriStar Godzilla. I remember reading an article somewhere that said they considered titling this movie Titanosaurus, which Titanosaurus was a Godzilla villain in Terra of Mechagodzilla. And I remember getting angry. I threw the magazine across the room. I was like, then why fucking call it Godzilla? If it could easily be Titanosaurus, then it's not Godzilla.
Right.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's not an adaptation. That's not an homage. We just need an IP name. And that always irritated me.
Sure.
Now, maybe that Titanosaurus story was bunk. It could have been bullshit. It could have been just made up nonsense.
Right.
But it irritated me back then. I remember being angry about it. I was like, then why call it Godzilla?
Well, and they would have saved themselves some heat because, the hatred of it from Godzilla fan, if it had been something else, it'd have been like, oh, okay, well, this is just a crappy kaiju movie.
I don't dislike that movie the way most people do.
Mm.
I don't think it's it's Godzilla. I don't think that's Godzilla. But I'm like, I've got it over there on a DVD show.
Wow. Full completist. Now, see, I don't have that one.
I had it, of course. It's got Godzilla's name on it. I gotta have it.
That's fair. All right.
I remember buying it because at the time there were a bunch of movies being made in Japan. And I was like, well, maybe if I buy this and the movie does really well on DVD, they'll release these other Godzilla movies on DVD so I can get them and have those, those films.
That plot didn't work real well, though.
They're all out. They all came out.
Here? In the U.S.?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, every one of them has been released.
That's what kills me is when they release them on disc, but they're like, you got to buy a special player to play them.
Oh, you get a U.S. version.
Wow.
Yeah, no, these are regular old Blu-rays.
Wow.
Or DVDs.
Discs in general. All right. Well, so okay. Speaking of Passage in Black, you have various, talked about, the graphic novel version of it, various creators adapting your work, and then you had Swords in the Shadows, had an eclectic mix of authors. Thanks for the chance to be involved there, by the way. Submit Sword, Sorcery, Horror Tales. What goes into curating a list of authors for an anthology? Because I'm assuming you had a hand in who did what with Passage in Black.
Well, yeah, Passage in Black was all me. That was
Okay.
And it was all inspired at Planet Comic Con in Kansas City. I had the prose editions of Passage in Black, and somebody came over and said, you should do a comic book based on this. And I thought, wow, that's a good idea. I'll do that. And then the next week I started working on it. So for me, it's Passage in Black was very much, I wanted to invite people who did not have an established name in comics. I wanted new creators. I wanted creators who just didn't have a platform really. And I think pretty much across the board, everybody that did a story in that book, artists and writers, were people that that was for some of it was their first published work, and for some of them they were just getting their feet wet, and some of them have moved on and are doing lots of cool things now. And with Swords in the Shadows, it was the same thing, except I wanted some people that I wanted writers, first of all, that I enjoyed. I don't want a writer that I don't want an asshole to work on the book. I have no interest in working with assholes. There's too many assholes in the world, and I don't need them in my book. So I wanted people that I actually enjoy their work, that are fun to work with, that are nice, that are cool. And I wanted a mix of established names that I knew could sell a book based on their name alone.
Sure.
Joe R. Lansdale.
Yeah.
That's a name. Brian Keene. Those are horror. They're icons in the horror in the horror genre. And then I wanted to make sure there were people that maybe had never been published. Josh Roberts. It was his first published prose work.
Yeah.
And I'm honored to have him in the book. So I wanted a mix, and then I wanted some in the in between, other folks who indie creators or just starting out creators. I just wanted a mix of writers I like to work with, that I like their work, and that I thought would be fun to work with. And I'm doing another anthology, as you know, called I'll Kill You Last. And it's the same approach. There are some writers in I'll Kill You Last that have never sold a short story until this book.
Oh wow.
And I met them at a convention. I thought they had guts, and I thought they were trying to do something. And I said, hey, why don't you do a story for this book? Because I just like the cut of your jib. I just like your style.
Right.
And yeah, so this will be their first story in some cases.
Wow.
And I love it.
This is very cool. I mean, luckily that, because I mean, I haven't read obviously the I'll Kill You Last stories, but Swords in the Shadows, they're insanely good stories. So I mean, that roll of the dice of like, hey, I dig you, write me a story, that worked out, because it could have bit you in the ass. It could have been like, hey, I dig you, write me a story. Oh, this is not good.
Well, look, if I have to edit, and there are stories that I've had to send, not send back, but there were stories that I was like, okay, we need to work on this. We need to massage this element a little bit. We need to, let's give it another go. And I think the story improved because of it. And that's my job as an editor. And my job as a curator is just to bring in people I like, people, Now, how many more of these anthologies am I going to do? I don't know. They're a lot of work, man. These anthologies are a lot of work. And I really got my start professionally doing anthologies. I mean, I published a magazine for several years. I published a horror zine called Whispers from the Shattered Forum, and it was a lot of work back then for no money.
Right. Yeah.
But I did it because I liked it.
Well, sure. And I mean, that makes it a little easier to a point. And then it's, well, all right. Gotta do paying things.
Well, it's funny. I did it so long ago, and I was in New York a couple of years ago, and Paul Tremblay, who I think is one of my favorite horror writers, he wrote, Cabin at the End of the World, the Pallbearers Club. He's written some really great horror novels. And I was talking to him, and he just out of the blue says, "Hey, you published one of my first pieces in your zine 20 years ago." I was like, "I did? I have no memory of this place."
Wow.
Yeah, and it's just it's neat that is even a thing. That I published some poetry that Paul Tremblay wrote 20 years ago.
That's
and
wild.
And here I am. I think he's one of my favorite, my favorite writers.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, to not even remember, like, your memory is interesting. Like, you can remember movies.
Well, I don't remember
every
name. I don't remember the name of every person who did a poem or a short story in Whispers from the Shattered form. I don't think I have to remember that right now.
Oh man. All right, so I've been touching on philosophy of craft in some of these episodes, if you're game. And I actually have one
Let's do it.
That's a little specific to you, because, and I mean, if it's a little too cutesy, a little too, like, I don't know, too much, we can skip it. But
All right, let's hear it.
I follow your newsletter, like I read your newsletter, and so I don't know if you've read Stephen King's latest, Holly, but he's got a bit. Okay, he's got a bit. I'm not gonna spoil anything, but there's talk of between poets, an elder poet and a younger poet, and like it has nothing much to do with the plot. But there was a moment in it that made me think.
God, there's poets in this book. I'm out.
You're out.
Anything to do with poets.
No more King. Be done. But he talks about, one of them talks to the elder talks to the younger and says something along the lines about gifts being fragile, like this ability to write. Gifts are fragile, and you have to be careful about who you entrust your gifts to. Now, in their case, context was a little different, but like in reading your newsletter, like you get real sometimes about the ups and downs emotionally of the business you're in. Like,
I know. I know. I gotta stop that nonsense.
No, I don't. I dig that. I dig particularly somebody that's also in the business and trying to break into the business like you've broken into the business. I don't want to say it's helpful watching you like have moments like that, but it's good to know that
you like to watch it crash and burn. You like the tire fire that my life is.
It's
sometimes.
not a tire fire. Jesus.
I'm gonna start putting in my newsletter. I'm gonna start putting tire fire warning.
It's not a tire fire. It's good to know that like it helps with that feeling of imposter syndrome, of like when I do have something or I go to a show and somebody geeks out about my stuff, like that someone like your level still has those up and down moments, like it makes me feel more it makes it normalized to me. All of that is a long-winded point to say, do you see any truth to what King wrote about? Like, do you have to be mindful of who, I mean, you kind of touched on this a little bit, like you don't want to work with assholes, but you have to be mindful of where you're working to keep going.
Yeah. No, so let's, if I talk about it from a publisher standpoint, there are publishers. I just went through this with an aspiring creator 3 days ago. He wanted me to run down the publishers and who would I work with, he's like, I just want to know every comic book publisher. I was like, all right, let's do it. And I said, I put my comic book publishers in 4 columns.
All right.
And he said, what are those columns? I was like, well, column 1 is they're open to creator-owned stuff and they don't take your media rights. Column 2 is they take control of your media rights potentially because that's part of their deal. Column 3 is they don't do creator-owned. They only do licensed properties. Column 4, I won't work with them ever again, no matter what, because they are A, assholes, B, crooks. C, these are the people I won't work with because I don't feel like they are. And there were some, and I'm not going to do that on this recording.
Sure, no.
There are some in that 4th column that are big publishers. I won't work with them.
Right.
and yeah, and it's also I have to really. It's a tough spot.
Yeah.
For me, the field is narrow right now. It's getting more and more narrow as it goes along. There are fewer publishers that I am willing to work with. There are fewer and the ones that I am working with, they can't keep up with me. So I have to I've made the choice. I'm going to do fewer stories because there are publishers I won't work with.
Yeah.
And then, you know, from the other side of it, I do believe that collaboration I collaborate with the publisher. I collaborate with my fellow creators. Now, that's the one I have a lot of control. Publishers and creators, I have a lot of control over. I'm not going to work with somebody I think is a jackass. I just don't want to do it. I don't want to work with a jackass, and I'm not going to do it. I'm the jackass in our creative relationship, not everyone.
Right.
But the other part of it is, in any kind of artistic medium, you're collaborating with the readers and the fans. It is a collaboration. I don't care what anybody says. It's a collaboration with those folks. And I have to accept that there are certain readers that I'm not collaborating with. I don't want them to read my stuff.
Yeah.
And it's okay. You don't have... First of all, I don't expect any one person to read everything I do. That's not what I'm about. I would love it if you read everything I did. That's awesome. Do that.
Right.
But if you don't, it's okay. We're fine. But then there are some readers, I don't want them reading my stuff.
Yeah.
I also don't want assholes reading my work. So, I mean, I guess that's weird. But I don't really, I mean, if they want to, that's fine, but I'm not going to chase them. I'm not going to market to assholes.
Pander to the assholes?
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
So I feel like you have to be aware of that stuff.
Yeah. Do you write to the audience? Like, are you writing with the audience in mind? Or you write like who?
No, I write to me.
Yeah.
I write to me as the audience. There's and that means I'm writing stories I would like to read, and that sometimes means people are like, oh, how would you write? Why would you write this? Because I think that'd be a fun story to read.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like everybody has to like my every decision in a story, because my favorite stories and books, I don't like every decision that was made in those. There are characters in my favorite movies that I wish survived that didn't, it's okay.
Yeah.
But I have to be the audience. I feel like if you try to write to a specific group, that way leads madness. There's madness down there. And I just don't think it's possible. I don't think you win in that scenario.
Right.
And there are books where I'm writing this and it feels like I'm pandering. Yeah, I'm pandering to me. This is what this is what I like. So it's okay. I'm pandering to me. And hopefully if there are fans out there who feel the same way as me, then they'll like it too.
Well, they seem to so far. Seem to be doing all right.
Man.
All right, let's get out of the quagmire of that question. like I said, playing with a little philosophy of creating, I don't know, I'm digging it. These are more rapid fire things that I've got.
All right, let's do it.
What, both for your individual style and just in general, what are your Mount Rushmore of writers?
There's 4 people on my Mount Rushmore of writers.
Okay.
And it's all me.
It's all you. 4 Cullen Bunns.
Cullen.
Wow.
No, that's a tough one. Robert McCammon is on that Mount Rushmore. Joe Lansdale's on that Mount Rushmore. Probably Stephen King and probably Robert E. Howard.
Okay.
And I only say probably because, like, man, there's a lot of great writers out there. But,
Sure.
Lansdale, and McCammon have their spots secured. You know, the others are being carved still, but King has to be up there for me. Oh no, I take it back. See, I already changed it.
Yeah.
It's Lansdale, McCammon, Bradbury, and King. That's the list right now.
All right. Now, is that your Rushmore of your consumption of art or your production? Like, is that, you think they've influenced how you write, or just what you did reading?
I think they've influenced how I write. They influence what I aspire to be. You know, I feel like those are, and it's just the stuff I love. You know, these are the stories I love.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Robert McCammon's Boy's Life is what I consider the best novel ever written. Hands down. Best novel ever. I love it. I cherish it. I've never met Robert McCammon. Met Robert McCammon. And I know I would be such a weepy fanboy when I did because of Boy's Life. It is so, and I like almost all of his novels I really love, but Boy's Life is like elevated many, many steps above everything else.
I'm gonna need to read it.
If you haven't read it, you need.
I have not.
Let's have a book club. Let's do a Boy's Life book club.
Let's Boy's Life. Let's kick it off with Boy's Life. All right, what's your, both of your own and of just in general? Somebody comes to you and they're like, "Hey, I've never dabbled in anything horror. I want to start." What would be your introduction to horror?
And we're talking comics?
Whatever. I mean, it could be comics, could be movies, could be like somebody just comes to you and says, "Hey, where should I start with horror?"
Man, I'd be hard pressed if you say, "Where do I start with horror?" I'd be very hard pressed, and I didn't name him on my Mount Rushmore, but I'd be hard pressed not to say read Clive Barker's Books of Blood, because I think that's where I would start somebody. Read the Books of Blood. The first three, books, the official Books of Blood, and then the other ones were, In the Flesh and whatever, and later they called them Books of Blood. But definitely those first three. Those short stories, mwah, chef's kiss. They're beautiful.
Those are solid,
They're ghastly, they're subversive, they're uncomfortable, and it's everything that horror should be. And absolutely, it'd be very difficult for me not to say read Books of Blood. I'd probably recommend short stories in general. I would point people to short stories, but the Books of Blood would be the first recommendation I make.
That's a solid pick. All right, well, I've taken over an hour of your time, so I will let you go soon. But where do you want to point everybody? Where should everybody come to find you?
So the best place, you can always go to cullenbunn.com, and that gets you to everything else. I do have a newsletter that you mentioned earlier. Thank you. That comes out once a week, completely free. Where sometimes apparently I get real with my.
You do, and I don't regret saying it. You do.
So I have a newsletter that you can get through. I think it's substack.cullenbunn, or if you look up Cullen Bunn Substack, you'll find my newsletter. It's called Nightmare Fuel, and I put it out once a week, and it's going to point you to everything I'm up to, and apparently a lot of like, I'm sad today.
That's going to be your takeaway from this whole episode. You're going to get off of this and be like, "Hey, you know what Aaron said? It's not what this was about." But
being a writer is sad.
It's sad. I feel bad.
I'm feeling really sad today.
All right, so the bourbon is kicked in for me. Every time I write something that's a little bit sad from now on, I'm gonna end it with a thanks, Aaron. It's gonna be my claim to fame. That's so shitty. All right, well, I still want to discuss. Do what?
when I die years from now, my headstone's gonna just say thanks.
Thanks, Aaron. People are gonna think I killed you. Oh man. All right. Well, I still want to discuss the works of Manly Wade Wellman with you over old fashioned some night after the show. But
we can get into that. Maybe you're gonna come to Tremendicon this year, right? You're Tremendicon bound, right?
Yep.
Maybe we should do a Manly Wade Wellman panel.
There'd be you and me there probably.
And we just talk about Manly Wade Wellman.
Yeah. We'd have to, anybody that came in, we'd have to spell out who that was. We'd have to, yeah. But
I'm not so sure this is a bad idea. I like it.
Well, we've been drinking a little bourbon tonight, so maybe we decide another time.
No, we decide now.
Right now. That's when the best ideas happen. All right. Well, man, thanks for having a drink with me.
Thanks for inviting me. I had a good time.
Until next time.